Hey guys! Today I want to do a brief showcase of the Dark Templar for the female Slayer class. I'll be covering things like general playstyle, tips and tricks for some notable skills, talisman recommendations, some example rotations, and some gearing guidelines for endgame optimization. Dark Templar is an incredibly versatile class with all kinds of utility. She deals magic percentage damage, meaning she scales with intelligence, and magic attack, which means you'll want to reinforce your weapon and not refine it. So let's dive right into how her kit works, starting with her passive skill, Evolve. Evolve is a very interesting passive because basically you have these stacks here, and when you attack enemies you have a set chance to actually absorb their souls and obtain stacks. And you can actually see this happen when you hit an enemy. You'll see their shadow actually go into the Dark Templar. Pretty neat effect. And at level 10, you have a 40% chance of absorbing the souls on a hit. And you have a cap of 30, but this will go up per level. And also, we have her first awakening passive, Loyal Servant, which has a % chance to debuff an enemy for 23 seconds at base. And this will actually give you, as soon as it procs, there you go, 1 soul every 3 seconds from that specific enemy. And this can be refreshed every 10 seconds per enemy. You can also turn this function off by going into your passive skills, but there is literally no reason to do this, so don't bother. Having evolved stacks is a good thing. There's literally no reason to turn that off. And moving on, we have Liberate Buckshot, which is your first method of consuming souls, and upon cast, you will see that you'll fire off up to 4 bolts, costing 2 souls per, and it'll just home in onto enemies and hit them for some easy damage. And the great thing about this skill is that this can be cast in the middle of other skills. So for example, like this, and they'll just fire off on their own. There is no casting animation. You can even do this while running. There is literally no animation for this whatsoever. Very, very nice. And then we also have Deadly Cape, which is a super hold ability with a very, very long channel. And this skill has no iframes, it is only super armored, so this is actually quite risky to use in some cases, so please be careful. But during the entire duration of the skill, your Buckshot's cooldown gets massively reduced. So you can fire off up to 3 Buckshots very, very easily. And then you can fire off a 4th one if you want, naturally. And this is a very, very nice bonus. However, please keep in mind that, again, you are only super armored, and fully channeling this can in fact be very, very risky, and it's, in most cases, just not worth it for raw DPS. But also, if you do cast it, you can press your jump key to skip straight to the finisher, and this is a very, very nice feature. And next we have Liberate Madness, which is kind of like an upgraded version of Buckshot, and it's really nice because this is actually technically a hold. This will cost 8 souls to cast. However, if you manage to hit an enemy, it'll refund 15 souls. So, if you miss an enemy, naturally you get nothing back, like this. But, you land it, boom, 15 souls off the bat, and of course you'll get even more if you hit multiple enemies and your evolve procs. Very, very nice. And next we have Deus-Ex Ray, her level 75 skill, and this is very, very cool because this will do bonus damage if you charge it, and it will consume up to 10 souls. And for each soul consumed, you get 1% extra damage. If you just tap it, it'll just consume 3 souls, assuming you have that much. But let's say you have 0 souls, you can still cast this ability. It's just that you will not get the attack bonus per soul. And yeah, it is going to be pretty fast though. Generally not worth it in my opinion. You should absolutely use it when you have enough souls. Ideally 10. The same thing goes for Judgment, her level 80 skill, which can also consume up to 10. This does not need to be charged, however. When you hold the skill down, you can aim the ability. But you do not have to hold it down like Deus-Ex, where you can just cast it and be done with it. This will consume up to 10 souls, assuming you have that many, for another 1% extra each, up to 10%. So ideally, you will cast this at a minimum of 10 souls. And finally, we can move on to her utility skills, things like shadow hiding, for example. Upon cast, you will sink into the ground, and you are completely invulnerable during this animation. You can press the hotkey again to just come straight up, but as you can see, you can move during this, and it has a very, very, very low cooldown, about 5 seconds at base. And yeah, it's cheating. Not many things can hit you during this duration. Only things that will basically break super armor or force you out into a standing position will hit you, but literally anything else will just not hit you at all. And we do have Shadow Binding as well, and this creates this line that super holds enemies. So for example, I have this cartel soldier here, and you can see he is held for the entire duration, but only while I am on this line. If I move off this line, the skill automatically ends and the super hold also ends. So this sounds kind of annoying, and it is, but if you get the TP upgrade, just one level is fine. You can see it says, enables a Dark Templar to move freely during these skills effects, and this means you can put it down and there is a clone left behind to continue channeling the skill for you, and you are free to do whatever you want. Very, very, very nice. So even if the 1 TP kind of seems wasteful, this is absolutely worth using just for raw utility. So next we have Scaffold, which is a very interesting ability. So you shoot out this orb that tracks an enemy, and the range on it is much wider than you might expect. It is basically a gigantic rectangle in front of her, but not behind. If you cast it behind, naturally it will just go shoot out. But let's say there's an enemy just in front of you, but like all the way up there. Scaffold will track that enemy. And it's kind of cool. And naturally you can combo this with Shadow Binding, use a skill here and there, and then Scaffold to continue the super hold. Very, very, very nice. But the one downside to Scaffold is that it has a tendency to miss in parties with high latency, and it can be very, very unreliable because of that. So comboing it in from Shadow Binding is absolutely recommended, and using it as close to the enemy as possible, but not at point blank range, is recommended. And next we have Soul Drain, which is a very unique ability. This will scan for enemies and multi-hit them like this. If there are no enemies, naturally the Soul Drain clone will just go away. But it is not a persistent AoE, it'll only scan for enemies once upon cast, so enemies that enter the range after you cast it will not get hit by Soul Drain. So keep that in mind, make sure you are aiming at an enemy that is vulnerable before you cast it. Next we have Black Mirror, which has a pretty good gathering ability here, and it'll multi-hit a little bit. And you'll also notice that I have this purple barrier. If you are in the range of Black Barrier while it's doing the damage, it'll give you this barrier as well as your party members, and this will absorb an amount of damage based on your HP. Very, very nice, very, very handy tool to have. Won't necessarily save you from death in a lot of scenarios, but it can absolutely mitigate quite a bit of damage. And there is one thing to look out for when using Black Mirror, and that is it can be very disruptive when using it in party play, especially with classes like Monk or Skirmisher, etc. that have very precise pinpoint skills, and you can absolutely move enemies out of their range, so please be careful when using it. It'll take some practice to get used to like the actual selection range, but it is something you should practice over time when doing endgame content. And lastly, we have our Second Awakening Punishment, which is this ability right here. And you can see this pentacle, this big circle here. Any enemies that are in that range upon cast get super held immediately, like so. And they are held for the entire duration as long as they're not hold immune. However, it does not mean it will not hit enemies outside the range. All it means is that enemies not inside the pentacle will not get super held until the multi-hit slashing portion, as you can see right here. The left one didn't get hit until the multi-hits started happening right here. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, very, very good ability. So let's move on to Talismans, starting with her Black Mirror Talisman, which will just increase the damage of the skill, but also supply you with a 15% movement speed bonus while you have a barrier, and this is okay. It's not super amazing. It's a nice bonus, but it's not something you should get just for the speed bonus. However, Black Mirror Talisman can in fact be very, very effective if you're using the Grey Catstone and Rhombus Earring combo. Very, very niche, very situational, but it can be quite powerful. Next we have the Starfall Talisman, which is also very strange. Instead of the 4 explosions that track enemies, instead it'll summon those flames and just have them orbit you while you walk around. It'll do a little tiny bit of multi-hit damage, but more importantly, they will track enemies after 10 seconds, or if you just start pressing the hotkey one by one, and you'll see it'll just home in on enemies. And you can use this in the middle of other skills, like this, as you can see, and they can be fired off pretty quickly. But it doesn't really offer a whole lot. It can be pretty decent for things like just getting multi-hits in. Not a lot of builds really need this, except for maybe like Heightened Fury Necklace, or maybe Ender's Gaze Shoulder. But DT already has pretty decent multi-hits already. I don't really think this is not necessary. It's okay. And lastly, we have Immolation here, and this is very nice because normally Immolation, before you get your second awakening passive, is a very, very long channel. This does get sped up by a large amount once you get your second awakening passive, but with the Talisman, it completely becomes an installation skill that happens in front of you and also has a suction effect, as you can see once I summon a bunch of enemies here. They all get sucked right into the center of that ability. Very, very nice. You can pair this with Shadow Binding, and then Scaffold, etc. Very, very, very nice. Next we have the Deadly Cape Talisman, which is a very strange one. On paper it is quite effective, but in practice I don't really recommend it. What it does is it reduces the multi-hit count and makes it much faster, and also does all the damage in one explosion at the end, and also continues to super hold the enemy after it's over. And it does sound kind of appealing, but the problem is Deadly Cape's kind of an awkward skill to use in most cases. Even though the paper DPS is pretty high, the raw utility is kind of not amazing. It also means less buckshots during the animation, so it's kind of, give or take, it's not really amazing in my opinion. I wouldn't recommend this. Moving on to the 3 most popular talismans, starting with the Destroyer, her level 45 skill. This is very strong. It's a huge damage increase, and also it gives 60% cooldown reduction. It doubles the amount of multi-hits for the actual explosions, but also it adds a finisher to the end, which is nice for damage, but also kind of annoying as it adds more channeling to the ability. It is very powerful, but very annoying. It's really hard to not use this. It's really hard to justify dropping this talisman just because of the raw damage of this talisman, but it can absolutely get you killed. Please be careful when using this. Probably best to use it at a safe range. Next we have Deus-Ex Ray. And this is really nice because you no longer have to charge the ability. It will consume all 10 souls. Up to 10 souls, assuming you have that many. And also, you have these 4 quote-unquote smaller rays that will hit no matter what. As long as you land the large initial ray, the other 4 will also land no matter what, which is very, very nice. The damage increase on this talisman is not as high as compared to some of our other talismans, but it is still a pretty nice talisman for just raw damage, and my recommendation just for overall DPS. And lastly, we have my most recommended talisman, Judgment, which normally has to be aimed, but now with the talisman, it'll just auto home in on the strongest enemy in the room, and and just deal its damage. And on top of that, it will not consume any souls. And this is very, very nice. You do not have to make sure you have 10 souls to cast this for maximum damage. It'll just always give you that bonus and not consume anything. And the great thing about this talisman is that you do not even have to be facing the enemy. They just have to be within your range. And as you can see, it'll just home in. And that thing is off my screen. It is still targeting it. Very nice. As soon as I walk here, it'll gray out and I can no longer cast this ability. Very, very nice to be able to tell whether it's safe to cast it or not. Up next, we have example rotations finally. I'm gonna go ahead and do a 30-second test with no speed bonus. I don't have literally anything, no talismans, no consumables, absolutely nothing. I do have max crit. Some key things to note about this rotation is that Soul Drain should not be pre-cast because, again, if there are no enemies in range when you cast it, it will not do any damage, so this will not work. You have to make sure you use it once the test has actually started. Black Mirror can only use twice, it has a 15-second cooldown. Madness I can use twice, 15-second cooldown. I will be using Liberate Buckshots basically whenever I can. And everything else just has too high of a cooldown. I'll be using them in between Soul Drains and Black Mirrors more or less. So here we go. That's about it. Nothing too crazy. And as you can see, my Soul Drains did a fair amount of damage, almost matching my Deus-Ex Ray actually. Immolation, pretty good. Judgment, pretty good. Destroyer, Black Mirror, etc. And Buckshots, not doing a ton of damage, but it is more or less free damage anyway, so pretty nice. And you can absolutely have a more specialized build. For example, I do not max Shadow Clone. It is a pretty popular skill otherwise. Some people will drop Immolation instead. That's totally fine. This is just my preference. And lastly, I'll be doing one rotation with Talismans. I'll be using Destroyer, Immolation, and Judgment. Naturally, you can absolutely use things like Black Mirror, Deus-Ex Ray, and if you really like it, you could use Starfall. I am personally not a fan. Totally up to you. As for runes, I am using kind of just a mishmash of things I just have, like Judgment and Black Mirror. On paper, Destroyer is very, very, very strong. If you have kind of a more basic skill build with Great Cast and Rhombus Earrings, Black Mirror is very good. Liberate Buckshot is actually also quite popular, apparently. And you can also use Deus-Ex Ray, you can use Judgment. They're all good. So unlimited HP, 30 seconds on the board, 60% speed. So again, same thing as the last test. Nothing crazy. I don't have any cooldown reduction on my setup at all. So same thing, I can only get 2 casts of Madness and Black Mirror. In theory, I could possibly get a 3rd Black Mirror, but it's going to be very tight and probably not going to happen just because it does have a set duration. I'm probably not going to be able to do this off cooldown. We'll try it. Otherwise, everything else is the same, so let's do it. Oh, maybe I can make it? Oh, nice. Kinda. Got some hits in. That was an attempt. You can see Judgment did a lot of damage there. Destroyer did a lot of damage. Immolation did a pretty decent amount. Deus-Ex Ray not using the Talisman. Soul Drain now is a lot further down just because these got a little bit stronger. Black Mirror, I almost got a full third mirror in, but the damage is pretty good still. Etc. Most of the rotation is more or less the same. Next we have gearing guidelines, and for this, I want to say that, yeah, Grey Catstone and Acrobatic Rhombus earrings are in fact pretty viable on her. She does have a pretty good kit for low-level skills. You have Buckshot, Shadow Clone, Soul Drain, Shadow Harvest, and some people even max Shadow Binding and Scaffold. I personally don't recommend it. Shadow Lancer is also pretty good DPS, even though the TP is kind of awkward to use. It is okay, but Black Mirror also becomes pretty powerful with Grey Catstone. It is a very niche build and personally not my recommendation, but it is viable. Otherwise, you can absolutely just use things like Mana Burn or the Archon setup, as well as the command setting here. However, there is an important distinction to be made for weapon choices. Because Dark Templar has access to all the Slayer weapons, you can choose between Short Sword or Katana. The differences are very minor. Short Sword has higher magic attack and lower intelligence, not by much, whereas Katana has slightly lower magic attack, slightly higher intelligence, and does have more speed, but the speed bonus is very small. And you might be able to notice it for some builds, but in most endgame setups you'll have a pretty decent amount of speed, and this will be mostly a negligible amount. Most people will use short swords for just raw damage, but if you really like the speed bonus from the Katana, or you can really feel the difference yourself, please feel free to use it. Culmination weapons are very interesting for Dark Templars because every time you use Buckshot, it'll actually reduce the cooldowns of your Destroyer, Deus-Ex Ray, Judgment, and Raking Thorns. So this is very good for just raw, sustained damage, very good for longer fights. And it can be really fun. I think this is absolutely worth trying out if you get your hands on one. Otherwise, you can absolutely use a Aspect Divide weapons, especially if you're going to be using Grey Catstone and Rhombus Earrings. Also, I highly recommend you check out Forte's guide video on Dark Templar as well, which I'll leave a link to below. He goes over some of the more technical aspects of the class, as he has way more experience with her than I do. So please check him out, he's got some great content on his channel. And that's all she wrote. To recap, the Dark Templar is a very versatile class with a hefty amount of utility. If her kit and playstyle look appealing to you the slightest, please absolutely give her a shot, I think you'll like her. If you have any questions regarding the class, please drop a comment below. You can also join my Discord server, which I'll leave a link to below as well. And you can catch me live on Twitch if you'd like to ask me anything directly. I stream most days of the week, generally after 5 p.m. Pacific, so I hope to see you there. Otherwise, have a good one, and cheers, guys.